So it's right along here. This is the tomb I was telling you about. See, when they opened this up in 1986, before they bricked it, they had to cut the iron door off with a blowtorch. When they looked inside back then, it was totally empty. All 6 coffins were gone. And nobody knows where they went to. Nobody. So this tomb, dug into the hillside here at the Western Cemetery, is supposed to be the eternal resting place for Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's parents, 2 of his brothers, his aunt, and his grandniece. But they're all missing. And that fact was discovered by a local historian and college professor named William B. Jordan Jr., known to his friends as Bill, in the summer of 1986. He immediately set about trying to solve the mystery, writing letters, checking archives, but he never solved the case. I learned about the riddle in 2016, a little over a year after Bill Jordan died. Now, while researching something else, I stumbled on a United Press blurb that ran in the New York Times back in '86. And the story was all about the missing Longfellows, but it was short and it wasn't much to go on. So this fall, I set out to see if I could find out more, maybe even solve the mystery. I found out a lot, but everywhere I turned I found that Bill Jordan had already been there, looking under all the same rocks. Still, I pressed on. Maybe there was something he missed. Maybe something had come to light in the 30-odd years since he was on the trail. Maybe. So this is the tale about what I found. I call it The Curious Case of the Poet's Empty Tomb. So this place, the Western Cemetery, is the second oldest burial ground in the city. Opening in the 1820s, it holds over 6,000 mostly unmarked graves. And it's quiet now and pretty neglected. But back in the 80s, it was full of garbage and weeds and broken bottles, homeless camps. It was truly a forgotten place. Vandals reigned supreme at night, smashing and scattering hundreds of the headstones. By the year 2000, the city had totally surrendered. They designated this place an official off-leash dog park. Canines were free to roam around and take dumps on the graves of former governors, Civil War veterans, Irish immigrants who fled the famine. It was not a proud moment for the city. Along the way to that low point, the city bricked up this stately row of tombs to keep grave robbers out, and that was June of '86. To make room for the brick wall here at the Longfellow family tomb, workmen from the county jail first had to remove the solid iron door guarding the entrance. And of course, Bill Jordan, he was a history professor with a deep interest in Portland cemeteries, so he was on hand that day too. There was an ornate lock on the door, which had rusted solid in place, and nobody had a key to fit it anyway. So they cut it off with a blowtorch, and behind that was a locked wooden gate meant for summer ventilation. Bill Jordan said that the gate collapsed and fell forward into the tomb when he touched it. When Bill stepped inside, he found nothing. I mean, nothing at all. No coffins, no bodies, no bones, no scraps of wood, or even a single nail. He told the Portland Press Herald that it was as clean and as neat as a ballroom floor. So where were Longfellow's parents, Stephen and Zilpah? Where was his brother Samuel and his other brother Stephen, or his Aunt Lucia, or his grandniece Nellie? There were no clues. There were no clues at all. So Bill Jordan thought, and I agree, there's really only 2 possibilities. First, grave robbers. It's not unheard of. Plenty of other tombs in Portland have been ransacked over the years by thieves looking for valuable jewelry, even gold teeth. But that theory doesn't make much sense. I mean, the gates were locked and the tomb was tidy. Grave robbers don't generally clean up after themselves and lock the door on the way out, and where would they get the keys from anyway? Nobody knew where they were. The second, and more likely theory, is that the 6 sets of remains were removed and reinterred somewhere else. But where? When? Why? And by whom? Well, that's what Bill Jordan tried to find out, and that's what I tried to find out too. During his lifetime, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was the best known and most successful writer in America. In fact, he was one of the most famous men in the world. His poems about Evangeline and Hiawatha and the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere won him fans from all walks of life, from farmers and housewives right down to Queen Victoria. School children used to memorize hundreds of lines of his poetry every year, and they celebrated his birthday like it was a national holiday. So how could this famous man's family be missing? I mean, and who were they anyway? To find out more, I met with Jamie Rice, Director of Library Services at the Maine Historical Society on Congress Street in Portland. They look after the Wadsworth Longfellow house where all these folks lived.
Stephen and Zilpah Longfellow were Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's parents.
Zilpah Wadsworth was tall and slender, with dark hair and blue eyes. And Stephen Longfellow was a Harvard-educated lawyer. He grew up in Gorham. He was a serious guy, somewhat stern, but he was considered quite a catch when he came to Portland as a young man. Both Zilpah and her younger sister Eliza were both interested in him. Stephen chose Eliza, but they never had the chance to get married because she died of tuberculosis at the age of 22.
Eliza died in this parlor, and on her deathbed she gave her sister permission to marry Stephen upon her death. So Eliza died in this room, and then shortly thereafter Zilpah and Stephen were married in this room. That
was New Year's Day, 1804. Now that story might seem a little macabre, but Stephen and Zilpah actually turned out to be a great match.
They did have a long and happy marriage. They both lived into their 70s and raised many children together.
Stephen was ambitious and a prudent kind of guy. He spent a lot of time away from home lawyering and later in Congress in the 1820s. Zilpah loved to read books and write letters. She was witty and she wasn't afraid to disagree with her husband.
I think Stephen might have seemed a little stern for my taste. But I think I'd like to know Zilpah. I mean, when you look at her bedroom upstairs, she definitely had some pizzazz. So I think I would have liked Zilpah quite a bit. Stephen might have been a little straight-laced for me personally.
Stephen died in 1849, and Zilpah followed in 1851. Lucia Wadsworth was one of Zilpah's other sisters. Now, she never married. She spent her entire life in that Congress Street home, first with her parents, and then with Stephen and Zilpah, where she helped raise their children. Lucia died in 1864. Also supposedly in the tomb were Henry's brothers Samuel and Stephen. Samuel, who died in 1892, was a Unitarian minister and a writer of hymns. Stephen was a lawyer, like their father, but he was also an alcoholic who died really young. The sixth and final body thought to be sleeping in the Western Cemetery tomb was Nellie Preble Longfellow. She was the granddaughter of Henry's brother Stephen, just 4 months old when she died in 1867. So my next stop was the Maine Historical Society Research Library to see if they knew anything about the empty tomb. They didn't. But I did make a discovery. After a tip-off from another archivist, I found a file Bill Jordan left behind when he died. It was basically everything he found out about the empty tomb, which unfortunately wasn't much. The file contained photos, letters, newspaper clippings, including a photo of Bill Jordan inside the tomb. It was definitely empty. There were also pictures of the scene outside here in the cemetery that day. And there were letters written to Jordan from people all over the country offering advice as to where he should search. Some swore it was grave robbers, some told him to consult psychics, and one even suggested he use local dowsers to find the missing remains. And I found letters Jordan wrote to members of the Longfellow family, and they were all dumbfounded. They had no idea where their missing ancestors were or that the tomb was empty at all. One of them that Jordan exchanged letters with was named A. Fairfield Dana. He was about 75 years old at the time and living in South Carolina. So this is the first response from A. Fairfield Dana. He would have been the great-great-grandson and oldest living relative of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And he says, I can't answer your question of who removed the bodies and when, and where did they go. And among the newspaper clippings, I found a story about the empty tomb published in the Boston Herald. It included a picture of Bill Jordan holding the lock that they cut off the door. So it's a big mystery. But what this pile of papers shows us is that using 1986 snail mail technology, Bill Jordan turned over every stone he could find. And now there's nobody left who would have known where they were moved to. If these guys didn't know, nobody living knew. Now, Bill Jordan always thought the most logical answer was that the bodies were moved to either Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Henry Longfellow was buried, or across Portland to Evergreen Cemetery, where many remains were moved when the city abandoned this cemetery. Evergreen Cemetery was opened as a replacement for the Western Cemetery just a few years after Stephen and Zilpah Longfellow died. And at one time, the city even offered free lots to anyone who wanted to move their family remains out of the Western Cemetery and into Evergreen. Maybe that's the answer. To find out, I visited Portland Cemetery Superintendent Joe Dumais. All right, so we're looking for some members of the Longfellow family. that are missing from their tomb in the Western Cemetery.
Right.
It's a possibility they got moved here. A lot of people did get moved over here.
Right.
Evergreen opened. Evergreen was a nice parky place.
Sure.
And so, would you mind searching for some names for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So you think they're in Evergreen Cemetery?
Well, I don't think anything. I don't know.
All right.
First, Joe looked up the missing names in his digital database. No luck there. So just to make sure, he took me to the fireproof vault where the written records are kept.
So we.
Wow, when you said vault, you meant vault.
So it's fireproof. There was a fire here in 1961. This was in place.
This survived a fire in
This
1961?
survived a fire, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
We even found copies of Bill Jordan's meticulously kept cemetery surveys from the 1980s. It took him decades to complete them, and he was ever the college professor, and he started them off with a literary inscription. Were these made by Bill Jordan?
Yeah.
What's it say?
I don't know. I don't have my
Show me the manner
in
which a nation cares for its dead.
And I will measure with mathematical exactness the tender mercies of its people, their respect for the laws of the land, and their loyalty to high ideals. Without
any trouble, we found a Longfellow family lot card, and it listed all the Longfellows buried in Evergreen and where they were located, but none of our missing folks were on it. A little later, Joe did tell me the city's paper burial records are not 100% complete. A few from the late 19th century are missing, and nobody really knows what happened to them. They may have been lost in a fire in 1961 at the cemetery office.
And so there's a theory that they were lost in that fire. We don't know what happened to them. Obviously, it was a long time ago. There's no one around to tell us. But there's a chunk of time where we just don't have the records.
Those were records that were damaged in the fire.
That's an assumption. Either they were lost in the fire or someone took them home and didn't bring them back.
So there's definitely no electronic record or paper record of Stephen or Zilpa or any of their family members getting moved to Evergreen. But just to make totally sure, I got directions from Joe on where to look for the family plot. Hey, Longfellow. Longfellow. Memory of Alexander Wadsworth Longfellow, which was his brother. One of his brothers. His wife, Elizabeth Porter Longfellow. No luck there either. Lots of Longfellows, including Henry's brother Alexander, but none of the Longfellows we were looking for. So I should point out that there's lots of graves at Evergreen Cemetery that don't have stones for one reason or another. People were too poor or simply not interested in marking their graves for all eternity. And likewise, there are many stones that are just memorials with no bodies buried underneath because they were cremated and scattered or lost at sea or something. But it seems to me that an important family like the Longfellows would not move 6 of their relatives out of a hillside tomb and reinter them in Evergreen without some kind of monument. The next place to look was Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That's where I found myself a couple of weeks ago, looking for Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's grave. Maybe he or one of his children moved the family remains south when the Western Cemetery fell into ruin. It seemed unlikely, but worth a look. That might be it right there. It is! We found it. The grave wasn't hard to find. There's even a map that leads right to it. And sure enough, there were Henry's immediate family and Henry, but not the folks we were looking for. There's no marker for his parents here. There's no marker for his brother or his Aunt Lucia or his other brother or his grandniece. They're not here. That's journalism. You know, you can't assume anything. You've got to go look with your own eyes and see for yourself. We've looked. There's no marker here for his parents. And we're going to go ask the archivist here if there's records of them being moved here. That's the only way to do it, is to really get out and look. I don't think we're any better than Bill Jordan would have been, but maybe. So having struck out at the graveside, I went inside to talk to the cemetery's archivist, Meg Winslow.
How you doing?
Pretty good. Hey, we're looking for Meg Winslow.
You're Troy?
I am, yeah.
Hi. How are you?
I'm very good.
You got good weather.
She led me to her downstairs office, and I told her the story of the empty vault and the missing members of the Longfellow family. So it's a pretty big mystery. So, bottom line, do you have any records of Longfellow's parents, Stephen and Zilpa, or his two brothers, Stephen and Samuel, ever being moved to Mount Auburn?
No, nor his niece Eliza.
His niece Eliza or his Aunt Lucia?
We have nothing.
You've got nothing
his
on
Aunt
that.
Lucia.
Of course I believed her, but she showed me the original paper lot cards and ledger books just to make sure.
Here's the original lot card.
And this would have been made around...
Well, these records were actually created around the 1930s.
Mhm.
But we have field books that date much earlier, in which they measured the lot out on the grounds. So the lot would have been purchased here, December 27th, 1836, by Henry W. Longfellow. And he chose this space, as far as I know, here on Indian Ridge Path, lot 580. And the lot card shows the list of individuals buried in the lot in chronological order. No parents.
Yeah.
No niece.
There's definitely
No brothers.
There's no Stephen Longfellow. There's no Stephen Jr. There's no Zilpah.
No Eliza.
No Samuel. No Lucia. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Definitely not. Internment Register 1 to 600, Mount Auburn Cemetery.
okay, this
Number
is,
1 to
this
600.
This is the ledger that was always used, and so we're looking at lot 580,
580,
which is the lot on Indian Ridge Path that you just looked
which is
at.
there. Yeah.
So this is definitive proof.
And that was that. No missing Longfellows at Mount Auburn. So I left there and traveled just a few blocks away to the Craigie house. So we're here at the Craigie house. This is where Longfellow lived his adult life while he was teaching at Harvard. And it's owned by the national government now, but there's also a great archive here of all of Longfellow's papers and a lot of stuff to do with his family. So we're going to visit the archivist named Christine Worth and see if she knows anything about where the Longfellows might be. Maybe there's some paperwork here that got filed a long time ago that says where Stephen and Zilpah went to. So we'll find out. I got to find the visitor center and ring the bell somewhere. Hey, I'm looking for Christine Worth.
Speak.
You're her.
Here, yeah,
Hi,
you're
I'm
Troy.
Troy Bennett. Yeah, how are you?
Me too.
Christine led me down to her basement archives and retrieved their file on the case of the missing Longfellows. It was started when Bill Jordan was there sniffing for clues 32 years ago in 1986. To my surprise, the file now contains my own email inquiries into the case. I'm pretty honored to be in the same vertical file with Professor Jordan. But the file is still thin. Other than my email, there's nothing in there that Bill Jordan didn't know back then, except for one thing. The missing tomb keys were found inside the house sometime in the 1990s.
There's work being done and continuing to be done in the 1990s, and the museum staff 20 years later is still, they're starting to open drawers and find things in there and pulling out, you know, bits and pieces that have been left around. And among them are the tomb keys.
The tomb keys.
They're beautiful and important objects for sure, but the keys don't really answer any questions. They just pose more. When did they arrive at the Longfellow house? The family lived in the house until the 1950s. It's been in the Park Service since the 1970s. And the keys were discovered inside the house with a handwritten tag on them in the 1990s. I mean, were they used to open the tomb when the bodies were moved, then brought back to the house for safekeeping? If someone thought to do that, why didn't they think to leave behind a record of where the bodies were moved? Maybe there's just a second set of keys somewhere, or maybe those aren't the real keys at all. There's no way to know for sure. So that's it. I got about as far as Bill Jordan got. Mostly we just confirmed the places that Stephen and Zilpah and their family are not laid to rest, not where they actually are. And like Bill Jordan, I believe they were moved, probably sometime in the 20th century, but I still have all the same questions I started out with. Where are the paper records of such a move? I mean, where's their new monument? Who moved them? Well, here's something though. Christine Worth told me that the Longfellow archives at the Craigie house contain over 40,000 items, manuscripts, letters, and other documents. A lot of it has never ever been indexed, and the papers aren't just from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Much of the collection comes from his siblings, his children, nieces, nephews, and other descendants. It was a big family. They wrote a lot of letters. They kept a lot of records. Somewhere, hidden in that collection, in some handwritten letter, fading in fancy cursive right now, there must be at least one passing reference to where the missing Longfellows are now resting. I'm sure of it. The only way to find that passing reference, that clue, that answer, if it exists at all, is to read those pieces of paper, all 40,000 of them, one at a time. And that boggles the mind. Well, that's that. That's all I've got. I'll just leave you with something Henry Wadsworth Longfellow once jotted down onto a scrap of paper. He said, "Perseverance is a great element of success. If you only knock long enough and loud enough at the gate, you're bound to wake up somebody."